Chapter 24, Battle with Swordfsh. And having routed the whole troop, with victory was a cock-a-loop. Hudibras, Part 1, Canto 3. All at once Leviathan snapped his enormous jaws together, like the crash of two colliding locomotives, raised his paddles high in the air, flapping them like ship's mainsails, uttered a thundering roar that shook the sea, and dashed forward with tremendous speed. "Ho! Behooves-on! Ho! Ho!" shouted Bttl, tugging at the reins with a power that would have thrown a dozen horses back on their harnesses. "Ho! Jrny! What's up?" shouted Captain Samadron. "Look yonder! There's a big fight going on." "Sharks?" queried the captain, as all on board sprang on the deck railings. "Swordfish and narwhales." "Pull up your seahorse." "By Jupiter, that's easier said than done. He's crazy for a fight. Your whole crew couldn't hold him." Bracing his legs in the stirrups and sawing the reins right and left through the monster's nostrils with a sound like the grinding of a quartz crushing mill, but Leviathan hurried on faster than ever. "He's getting unmanageable," said the captain. Bttl grasped his 500-pound sledgehammer, whirled it aloft with a terrible sweep, and brought it down on Leviathan's bony brow with a stroke that would have smashed the skull of a whale. The monster shook his head, uttered a deep guttural growl like the muffled roars of 1,000 lions, and paused in his career. A short distance ahead, the sea was thrown into a frightful tumult, as a great piscatorial battle waged before us. A colony of narwhales, or sea unicorns, in the course of their migration over the sea, were attacked by a fierce horde of amphibians, or swordfish. The narwhales had assembled themselves in a circle, in the center of which were collected their females and helpless young, while the outside was occupied by the males, in a compact ring, bristling their spiny, twisted ivory tusks, which project forward from the snout, and are from 5 to 7 feet in length. Outside the ring, myriads of swordfish in tumultuous masses hurled themselves against the narwhales, and the clashing of their long, bony spears against the tusks resounded like hammerings of 1,000 anvils. The fury and persistence of the assault was equaled only by the unflinching bravery of the defense. The force and impetus of the collision often threw the whole ranks out of the water. At each successive charge of their foes, the narwhales dashed them back as from the walls of a rampart, or fenced them like skilled swordsmen, their strong tusks snapping off the bony spears, while those beneath, the ring being in layers one above the other, plunged their tusks upward, ripped up the bodies of the amphibians. The outlying crowds of swordfish, unable to reach the narwhales because of the press, leaped over each other in all directions, in their blind rage, plunging their swords into each other and all over the field. Fratricide combats were raging with unexampled fury. The waters were converted into a seething cauldron of crimson foam and writhing combatants, while the lashing of fins and tails, the hammering of spears and tusks, mingling with the enraged bellowings of the narwhales, combined to produce a piscatorial pandemonium utterly frightful and indescribable. "These swordfish infest this part of the sea," said the captain. "Leviathan hates them as we do snakes. The creatures are from 20 to 30 feet long, fierce and voracious as sharks, and, although their spears cannot deeply penetrate his scaly armor, yet they worry and annoy him beyond endurance." Leviathan uttered repeated roars, and his excitement was so great, Bttl could scarcely control him. In the meantime, the piscatorial battle was raging with more fury than ever. Leviathan waited his master's orders. Bttl threw the reins over his shoulders, secured his wand and hammer to the platform, clasped his legs firmly around the cranial buckler, and grasped a great brass ring on the pommel of the saddle in his left hand. "Captain," he said, "Bttl and I are going to walk into that fight." "What?" Mounted on a saddle as you are? Of course. But you'll be whirled right and left, tossed up and down amid the waves, perhaps flung from your seat. Ha ha, laughed the giant. Have you forgotten the sea serpent and the devilfish? How Bavzon and I served them out? Well, then, you're bound to have your own way. All I can say is, go ahead, and may the eagle of victory light on your banner. As she generally does, he replied, waving his terrible whip, then shouted at the top of his voice. Hula, hula, my brave Bavzon! The monster sprang halfway out of the water with a scream of rage that seemed to split the very heavens. His fiery mane bristled all over his head, giving him a terrible appearance, and his eyes seemed to emit sparks of fire. Then, tearing madly through the waters, he dashed into the thicket of the battle. The narwhales, instinctively conscious of the approach of a friend, dove down en masse to the depths of the sea, while the swordfish, enraged at the loss of their prey, gathered around their gigantic foe, hurtling themselves in thousands upon him, their long spears rattling against his scaly armor or snapping off in their furious onset. Leviathan rushed through their masses like a tornado, every stroke of his enormous paddles and tail smashing whole ranks at once, darting hither and thither, snapping his terrible jaws, crushing them with a single bite, or tearing them to pieces and flinging them high into the air. But his gigantic master was even more terrible to behold. Swaying to and fro on his saddle under the tremendous surgings of his steed, he lashed them with his mighty whip, its fiery barbs throwing off showers of electric sparks, every stroke cutting to the bones, ripping up, tearing to pieces, or skinning from snout to tail dozens of swordfish at once. Showers of spray and fragments of flesh rained down on the deck, lacerating bodies. Broken spears and crimson surf swirled around us. It was like a battle of the gods. And this terrible horseman and charger rushed over the ensanguined field. Leviathan looked like some incarnate Janus of vengeance, crowning his mission of destruction with a grand and bloody carnival, while Hartilion was like the Jupiter Olympus, hurtling his Vulcanian thunderbolts at the Titans. The carnage was brief, and the army of swordfish was annihilated. The scattering remnants fled in terror from the field. Artilion resumed his post. The crew cleared the deck. Leviathan sped over the sea with a thundering roars of triumph, while the grateful narwhals followed in his wake as fast as their fins and tails could carry them. In a short time we drew up to an island on which stood a number of dwellings. We were greeted by a crowd of people, and Leviathan moored alongside a stone pier. Artilion now descended from his station, his eyes sparkling with pleasure and his face flushed with his exertions. As he strode forward among the officers and seamen who greeted him with cheers, he looked like Hercules receiving the ovation of the Argonauts. Well, Captain, he said with a jolly laugh, victory perched as usual on Leviathan's crest. We all hope you enjoyed the battle, replied the captain. So, I like to thrash the vermin with my whip, but it was like fighting mosquitoes. Give me a genuine Vodra narcissus, 200 or 300 feet long and big enough to swallow an elephant. Give me an octopus that could pull over a ship for my game. They're worthy of Leviathan's notice. But it's time for his dinner. And taking out his silver pipe, he blew a shrill whistles. A number of barges, manned by sailors and laden with large quantities of nutritious varieties of seaweed, mixed with the chopped-up bodies of fish, drew up to the pier. Leviathan, under his master's directions, dipped his beak into the barges and partook of his repast with a decorum such as would have done credit to a gentleman seated at his dinner table. What is his daily allowance? I asked. He takes his regular 3 meals daily, with lunches whenever he likes, Hartilion replied. He usually consumes about 900 tons of food per day. He is a very small eater. Other barges drew up, containing great tanks of fresh water. Leviathan dipped his beak into them, raising his head and swallowing after the manner of birds. As the streams ran down his throat, the sound was like that of a mill sluice. Having swallowed enough to quench the thirst of 200,000 men, he curled his head over his shoulders and went to sleep. "He always takes a short nap after dinner," said Hartillion. The crew now opened the provisions chests, spread tables under the awnings, and loaded them with Martian viands in profusion. We all partook of the repast, which was enlivened with the philosophical disquisitions of the doctor, the jolly good humour of Hartillion, and the drolleries of John. The repast concluded. "Come, Corporal," said the doctor, "give us a special specimen of your war chief's performance." "All right," he replied, and disappeared behind the curtains of his private awning. In a short time he sprang out, completely transformed into a magnificently ferocious New Zealand warrior chief, his face, breast, and arms painted in fiery colours with figures of owls, bats, devils, imps, his hair standing up in spikes all over his head, which was surmounted with tufts of seagulls' feathers, his ears, nose, neck decorated with rings and necklaces of shark teeth and birds' claws. A striped red and yellow blanket flapped over his shoulders. A vicious-looking knife stuck in his belt. He grasped a long toasting fork in one hand, and a cudgel, its head stuck full of sharp nails, in the other. On top of his head perched the raven, tricked out like a Methodist parson, clad in a long black gown, shirt collar up to his ears, a white wig plastered over his head, a stovepipe hat, spectacles on his nose, and holding in his claw a long sermon. John had occasionally amused us by getting up this character while on the island. He sprang forward with a tremendous war whoop, glaring ferociously around at the assembled throng, brandishing his cudgel and toasting fork. "Brethren and sister," croaked the parson in sanctimonious nasal tones, "let us pray." "Excellent, my pious but somewhat carnal-minded brother," said the doctor. "'Tis always proper to open the theatrical performance with a prayer. Ari kakadu, tano pakame karoji takaka alian," yelled John, ripping out a perfect volley of high-class New Zealand oaths. "Me big Tanahoy war chief have killed, cooked, and eaten 1, 2, 3 dozen enemy chiefs. Who dare say I damn lie?" Looking fiercely around. "Nobody? All right, reckon you be heap me fraid. Me killee all you 1, 2, 3 minutes. By jingo, me no hurt Captain Fred nor old doctor." Looking at us benignly. "Me love them big heap. Me scalp that big fellow over there." "Hooray! I'm Jack the Giant Killer!" vociferated the parson, glancing fiercely at the big fellow. "All right, parson, we'll scalp 'em all right round. Off heap, cookie 'em all by and by. Have heap good dinner." "Roast beef, horse tack, hurry up," ordered the parson, flapping his wings and snapping his beak. "Whoop! Me big work, chief. Look out!" tossing his war club and toasting fork up into the air and adroitly catching them as they fell. "Rats, rats, bow wow wow, scat, scat," screeched the raven as John jumped 6 feet in the air and tore over the deck in a ferocious war dance, rattling his cudgel and fork like a pair of castanets, scowling and yelling like a high-class New Zealand devil, all the while all on board almost split their sides with laughter. Then throwing down his weapon and placing his arms akimbo, he dashed off in a regular sailor's hornpipe, in which he was joined by the parson, and they skipped around each other, pirouetting, kicking up their heels, mincing and ogling coquettishly at the audience in a style that would have astonished the corps de ballet of the Grand Opera, amid the tumultuous applause of all on board, Hartillion vowing that he would put them at the head of the corpse of the Martian theatre comique. Then, with sweeping bows and smiles to the audience, the war chief and the carnal-minded parson retired majestically to their awnings.